little intro and then we can talk about workplace culture, and it'd be lovely if we can share some best practice. So for those that are joining, my name's Nicky Wright, MD of Diversity Jobs Group. We are recording this session, by the way, so I'll make sure it's sent out to everybody afterwards, and it'll be on our news page. So Diversity Jobs Group is a job board. We have 10 ED&I related job boards. We work with well over 100 clients, corporate clients, but we've also just launched a new job board, which is Diversity Jobs Recruit, which is bespoke for recruitment agencies. But recruitment agencies are not on the main 10 Diversity Jobs Group board. I created it about 4 years ago off the back of being frustrated in the marketplace and didn't believe that one underrepresented group should trump another underrepresented group. So that's why we have a suite of 10. Passionate about ED&I, always been a foot stamper from about the age of 2. Still foot stamping at the age of 44 nearly. And Greg is one of our lovely clients and has kindly offered to come on and do a bit of a session on workplace culture. Greg, shall I let you do a whistle stop?
Of course, thanks, Nikki. So, hi everyone. My name is Greg Turner-Smart. I'm Inclusion Manager at Rolls Royce SMR. Rolls Royce SMR, if you've not heard of the company, we are in the nuclear sector, and we're currently going through a process bidding for a contract from the government, which will help us to provide sort of clean, green energy and help with our ambitions towards net zero as a country. And that is why I unfortunately have to disappear at 12:45 today. So apologies that we're going to be a little bit shorter than originally planned. That is 100% my fault. My background is actually in engineering, so my degrees are in engineering. But my career direction changed in 2015 when I was asked by Rolls Royce PLC, where I was at the time, to set up an LGBTQ plus employee network. And in doing so, that really ignited a passion in me for all things ED&I. Had some good success with the LGBTQ plus network, and in 2020 was actually asked to move into a full-time ED&I role, where I gratefully accepted the opportunity. Had a fantastic time doing that role in PLC. In 2022, I moved across to Rolls Royce SMR, where I have full accountability for all things ED&I within the business. We're currently 600 employees, but assuming we're successful with this contract that we're currently tendering for, we'll be growing to quite a substantial size in quite a short space of time. So it's really important at the moment for us. Our big priority is about having an inclusive culture embedded in the business now before we grow, so that we continue to grow and develop into the company that we want to be. So very exciting time for us. Great to be on here. Diversity Jobs Group, a company that our recruitment team are working closely with to help us with our ambitions around diverse hiring. And it's also great to be LGBTQ plus ambassador for Nikki and the team as well.
Thank you, Greg. We've had a few more join. I have allowed everybody's mics and everyone's cameras. So like I said, feel free if you want to come on camera, more than happy for you to do so. Right then, Greg, should we get started? So Greg and I tend to have these conversations, don't we, when we finish talking about holidays, and then we have these conversations and we get into the whole ether of, oh, what's, we talk about culture and what he's doing within Rolls Royce SMR, and the frustrations that I face when I was speaking to different clients and our clients' different frustrations. And it goes on to the subject of workplace culture and allyship. So let me share my screen because I have done a few little slides. Now, I've done the intros, so that's great news. Can you see my slides, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah. Fabulous. Good. Right. So inclusion isn't just about certain groups, it's about everybody, but often men feel excluded from inclusion journeys. Join us as we tackle the issue head on, discussing why it's crucial to bring everyone along and the challenges that arise when certain groups feel left out. We want to hear from you. Please, it would be great if you can share your ideas, experiences, success stories, and let's make this webinar a little bit more of a collaborative environment. Key topics, and it'd be great if we can talk about the importance of allyship, addressing feelings of threat and disengagement, and how we can truly build a culture of truly inclusive inclusion. Got my words all mixed up there, but hopefully we all know what I said. Right, Greg, but let's open the floor up, but I'm going to ask you first, Greg, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. What is allyship and why is it important in today's workplace dynamics? potentially, if you can wrap up the second question as well in that, and how would you define good allyship, and what are the good examples of it in action?
I think the title of the session is about bringing everyone onto the inclusion journey. I think for any organization to be successful in creating inclusion, you really need to do that. So if you have any sort of naysayers, anybody who doesn't buy into it, they're always going to be providing resistance, pulling you down. So to be truly inclusive and to really create that workplace culture that we're all striving for, it's really, really important to put a focus on those who might not necessarily want to join in the work that you're trying to achieve. And that's where allyship has a big role to play. Interestingly, when we talk about making sure everyone's on board, often men is the group of people that we may think about. And I say interestingly because I'm just looking at the list of names on this session today, and it's not unusual at all when I join in sessions such as this one that the highest percentage of attendees will be female. I think looks like we're 100% female, apart from myself today. That in itself is a big message around why it's important to try and get everyone on board. That question about allyship, though, it's a really important element of all of the work that we do in ED&I. It's about supporting the people that are less fortunate than you, recognizing that some people face more barriers or more challenges than others, and taking the steps to provide support to those different groups of people. It's about using your own privilege, and I sometimes hesitate with that word. It feels like it's become a dirty word almost in some circles, but we do all have privilege of some degree. We are all more fortunate than other people in some respect. So it's making sure that we understand that privilege that we have, the barriers that we don't face that others do, and taking steps to then help those people overcome those barriers. For me, one of the definitions I've seen of allyship, which I think is a great way to think about it, is that it's about speaking up for other people when they're not there. It's about, if you hear somebody making a comment that's homophobic or racist, but there's nobody in the room that would be directly impacted by that, really, really good allyship is still speaking up and challenging it and saying, actually, no, that's not acceptable, even though there's nobody in the room who may be directly impacted. When we talk about good allyship, good examples, I actually think there's a really topical situation in the UK at the moment that looks to me like a really bad example of allyship and how that could have been twisted to be much better. And that's the situation we've seen in Parliament over the last week involving Diane Abbott and the racist and misogynistic comments that were made about her. And I've sort of sat and watched almost with horror at her attempts last week to speak on the conversation. Can you imagine being in your workplace surrounded by people who are talking about an issue that directly impacts you, that was all about you, and you attempt 46 times to make a comment on that, and each time you're prevented from doing so? That was a really, really bad example of allyship. What could have happened in that situation, and okay, I don't know the protocols and processes within Parliament, but what could have happened in that situation is one of the many other people who were chosen to speak could have used their platform to say, no, I want Diane Abbott to speak. We should be listening to her voice. She is the person that was directly impacted. That for me would have been an example of really good allyship, giving the voice, giving the platform to somebody who was being suppressed. I actually think what happened in Parliament last Wednesday will be held up as a case study in years to come on how not to do things. But I think for me, that's an example of allyship that we didn't have, but we really could easily have had. It's about inviting others to speak. It's about giving that platform to other people, lifting them up and helping them to really have the same opportunity as everybody else. Other things you can do as a good ally: learn about your own bias. Again, unconscious bias is not one of those terms that feels like it's becoming a dirty word almost, but we all have it. It's really important that we understand what it is and the impact it can have. So understanding the bias that we all have. Nobody's perfect, not least myself. I read a book recently about how men will read books by male authors, predominantly by male authors, to the tune of about 80% plus, whereas women read books that are more sort of 50-50 down the middle between male and female authors. And I thought to myself, there's no way in the world, I'm passionate about ED&I, it's my profession. And I was convinced that I wasn't like a typical man and that I didn't just read books by male authors. And then I went and looked at my bookshelf and went through the last 10 or 15 books I've read. And sure enough, I had that bias where I was just predominantly reading books by men. Yeah, and it really caught me off guard, actually. And since then, I've made a conscious effort to think about the authors that I'm reading. And I've actually been mixing it up, and it's pretty much 50-50 in the last few books I've read. So thinking about our own bias, we all have it.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing. It's just a natural thing. It's only a bad thing if we don't understand it and take steps to address it. So that's another example of good allyship. The other one I would say is around educating yourself as well. So learn about the issues that other people are facing and why they need allies and what are the challenges that they face. Sometimes it's all too easy to just question the minority groups or the people that are being affected by these different issues. That can be really burdensome and really tiresome for those individuals, especially if they're very much a minority in a workplace. I always remember talking to a trans colleague a few years back, and just everybody went to her with questions about trans rights and trans issues. And while she was passionate on the subject, it was actually quite disheartening for her to realize that people were almost lazy about it. All that information out there on the internet, all of those books out there, all of those resources available to us all. Yet the default is just go straight to her and ask and ask and ask, and that can be quite tiresome. So it's really, really appreciated by people if you actually take steps to educate yourself and demonstrate a willingness to learn before always putting that same person on the spot with questions. So a couple of examples there of what I think good allyship looks like. But as you said at the start, Nicky, if others have got other ideas, would love to hear them if you're willing to speak up or pop them in the chat.
Anybody else before I was going to go on to oh, hi Safi, there's a few more people joined. I'm just going to undo everybody's mics that have joined, so bear with me. Allow mic, allow camera. Hopefully everybody bear with. Allow mic. Sorry, I'm just doing my admin. Allow camera. Just following on from Greg, and I am conscious that we've got a hard stop at 12:45 today, but has anyone got any really good examples of allyship or what you're doing in your current workplace or previous workplace that you feel happy to share with us? Don't worry, I'm not putting anyone on the spot. We have more slides, more questions for Greg. He didn't get put on the spot because you had these questions already, Greg, right? Yeah, you're
I've had a chance to think about them.
Yeah. Anything else? Happy to go on. Put a hand up if you do. Greg, can you see the chat? If people put anything in chat while you're talking, if I'm presenting.
Yeah,
Fabulous.
I can, yes. And
yeah.
if you've got any questions at any point, please do interrupt. I always find these sessions are much better when it's not just me talking. So if you've got questions, please do shout out.
Fine, lovely, great. Let me just allow that. Right, 1 second. Let me ask you a few more. Right. How do we ensure that all members of the workforce, including the minority groups, fully embrace the concept of allyship? I've got a question on this, Greg, just before you answer it, or a further question. How is it within organisations you've worked for, if somebody's from a different underrepresented group, potentially, can they still be part of that allyship? Can they still go to those meetings? So, for example, if it's a women's like a women's gender for women, a women's group, can men still attend those meetings? Like, how are we including people that are not part of those underrepresented groups?
That's absolutely critical that we include everybody in the work that we're doing. So for example, with employee networks, one of the values that we've built in Rolls Royce SMR, and I think it's absolutely crucial wherever you are, is that they should be open to everybody. We actually actively encourage committee members within our networks who are not from that particular minority group. So obviously the minority group needs to be the majority in the network. It's their network, it's their safe space. But it's really important to have allies on board to get different perspectives and different experiences, and also to help demonstrate that commitment and support from other people. What we don't want is them to become closed groups where others feel excluded, and therefore it is just a representation of one minority group that other people feel they can't get involved in. So it's really important. And also, the majority are the ones who can really drive the change as well. So men are the ones who can really drive more gender equality in the workplace, because typically it's the behavior of men that would be misogynistic. So, it's getting men on board to help with gender issues. It's getting straight people on board to help with LGBTQ issues, because they're in a position of more privilege to help really push that change. So I think that's really, really important. The other element of that, which is important as well, is, as I said, it's about getting those different perspectives and different understandings, so we can really get more people on board. Diversity of thought, diversity of experience, and it's making sure people realize that we all have a part to play when it comes to creating more inclusion. In terms of the question, I was going to say, so in terms of how do we make sure everyone embraces allyship, I think education is a really important part. Actually, before I go on with that, I can see there's a hand raised. I may link to what I've just said. So Josie, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, Nikki. Hi, Greg. Hope you can hear me.
We can.
Sorry, because working from home, and today I've got Wi-Fi issues, so I don't think you can see me, but hopefully you can hear me. So I work for the John Lewis Partnership, and to your earlier point around celebrating good allyship, you may have seen a few weeks ago our partnership, Pride in the Partnership Network, that represent our LGBTQ IA plus partners, published their first magazine, an identity magazine that was picked up by, shall we say, non-allies on a social platform. And there was a huge backlash through that person, and I won't give them any credit by mentioning them, but we saw real allyship from our partners internally stepping up to really kind of support those partners, and I think that was a good example for us of how we can use our privileges to really kind of shout out when things are not right. So that's something we're proud of. But one of the things as an ethnic minority partner, in terms of allyship, and using the example you created last, re Diane Abbott, it seems it's one of those areas where it seems to be difficult to recruit allies in a sense. And I was just wondering, in your experience, how have you kind of found that and approached those kind of discussion? Because you've been great in sharing the male allyship aspect, but I find that with ethnicity, it's sometimes difficult. We'll all celebrate, our cultural palette. We'll eat Chinese and we'll eat Indian food and things like that, and we'll go to those exotic countries and things like that. But when it comes to those real difficult spaces of standing up in support of someone who's in that difficult position, how have you come across anything like that before, and how have you kind of stepped into that space to be a good ally? Anything that I can take away? Thank you.
I've got, sorry, have you got an example, Greg? Because I've just got a personal one, if I could use that just before you give a work related one. Do you mind? So I've got 3 children, and 2 of my children are boys of colour, and as a white mum, but their dad is mixed race, the boys have had racism at school, and because they are my children, regardless of what colour they are, I've stepped up, as you can imagine, as any parent would, the lioness protecting her cubs. But I did that naturally because I'm their ally. But that's why it's so important that you have allyships, and you bring people on the journey, regardless of you don't need to be part of that ally group, as in the representation of that group, but you need to have people from different groups to be able to support those individuals. Sorry, Greg, I felt like I had to share that. Not sure why, but I did.
Thank you.
That's fine. Not a problem. Greg. And I do recall seeing that in the media, actually, what you're talking around with the recent backlash that you faced. And it's a really difficult time at the moment because there's so much hatred, is the word that comes to mind, in the media around the woke agenda. It is a really difficult time. I think it's interesting as well around the engagement piece. We have different levels of engagement across some of the different work that we do, and ethnicity does for some reason seem to struggle a bit more than the others on occasion. So some of the things that we've done looking at that, first of all, we really emphasize as part of the work that we do that ED&I is not just about our differences, but it's also about our similarities. So sometimes there's a few things that we do where we'll flip the focus around, and actually we'll talk about what our similarities are, and we'll highlight them and spotlight them, because a lot of people, you know, they focus on the difference, especially when it's visible, and then they think, well, I'm not like that person, we've got nothing in common. But actually they have loads of things in common. It's just understanding what that is and identifying them. We've got a set of team resources that we use within the business, different exercises on ED&I that we roll out in team meetings and things like that. There's a really great one, which is around, you know, you have two people standing facing one another, and then it'll be things like, you know, I'm British, you're French. Okay, that's a difference. We take a step back, and then we identify the differences. So the two individuals get further and further apart. And then we start saying, okay, what have you got in common? Well, we both speak English, come further, we've both got a degree, get close. And then you bring them back together. And it's a really good visual demonstration of how, yes, we all have differences, but actually we've all got similarities as well. So I think sometimes shifting the conversation to our similarities and emphasizing that is really, really important. The other angle that we really focus on is around empathy. So making sure that we give all of our employees a platform to share their concerns, their issues, their challenges, but also their experiences. One of the things that we do, I think, quite well is a storytelling series internal to the business called We Are SMR. And usually we release an article about every 2 weeks, and we give the platform to different employees who want to share their personal story. And some of those have become really quite personal. And it's a fantastic opportunity, though, for someone to actually really share what they have gone through. And we have had some recent examples which have been really well received from ethnic minority employees talking about being on the receiving end of racism or discrimination. Just last week, we had a colleague talking about Ramadan, a Muslim colleague talking about Ramadan. And in his story, you know, he was sharing the fears that he's had in the past, the concerns. He's actually quite young. He's an apprentice still, and this is the first Ramadan he's had where he's been in the workplace. So he was sharing all of his fears about what it would be like at work and how he would be treated, and whether he would, you know, be mocked because he was celebrating a Ramadan and things like that. Unfortunately, he's having a really positive experience, but the reception of that article was fantastic. The number of comments on it from colleagues across the business, showing their support and appreciating the learning that provided for them is really important. So it's that opportunity to step into somebody else's shoes. And our Reach network, which is for ethnic and religious minority employees, they're doing a fasting challenge next week. So all employees have been offered the opportunity to actually participate in a fasting challenge just for one day, not for the full month. But that's a great opportunity to understand actually what are our Muslim colleagues going through. What is it like to fast for a day, having to get up at 4:30, 5 o'clock to have breakfast? And you know, I've done it. I did it last year. I took part in the fasting challenge last year, and it's such a great way to learn more about a different group and the challenges they face, and then what can we do actually to support that group at a particular time. So I think a focus on empathy as well is really important, so that people appreciate the needs or the challenges that other people may be facing. But the big one, like many things with ED&I, it comes from the top. It's our leadership, and we've got a really committed leadership team. Every week, a different member of the executive team releases an article through our weekly newsletter, and almost without fail, they will be talking about ED&I. And just Friday gone, it was our chief financial officer whose turn it was to do the newsletter. And in there, he talked about Ramadan, and he talked about the lunch and learn events we did. He talked about the fasting challenge, and he shared his commitment and encouraged everybody else to get involved as well. And I think having that leadership support from the very top is so important when it comes to empowering other people and helping them to step up and get more involved. So that's a couple of examples of what we've been doing recently.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Thank you.
I see there's a question in the chat as well from Claire, which I hadn't noticed earlier on.
Thank you.
So how can we get representatives of some minority groups to join the ED&I board where maybe they're struggling a little bit? I think being really clear about the aims and objectives of the board is important, and why you are inviting them to participate. We have something similar in Rolls Royce SMR. We call it the Inclusion Forum, and it's representatives from around the business. And we wanted to make sure we had good representation of different minority groups as part of that. One of our chief engineers is black, and he was invited to be part of the board to represent our engineering function. And he was very honest with us when he joined at the start about, it was his assumption that we'd invited him because he was black, and that we wanted to have a black employee there in representation, which of course we did. And I think there's that almost that response of, I'm not invited for my views, I'm not invited for my experience, I'm invited simply because of the color of my skin. And that was how he felt, and that was actually a hangover for him. He explained to us that was a hangover for him from his previous company, where he was always the one that was asked to feature in photographs when they were doing the new marketing materials, always being rolled out. And I think that's a bit of a hangover. So for me, it was really important that we had that open, honest conversation with him to say, actually, part of the reason we want you there is because you have unique experiences and perspectives as a black person, also as a black leader, which we don't have many of in our business, unfortunately, at the moment. So yes, there is that element to it, but actually we want representation from the top of engineering. And when we looked at the other people who were there and had an opportunity to feature, actually there were reasons why they weren't the best person, or they already had other commitments in our strategy, and we wanted to share it out across the team. So actually, when he realized there was more to it than just that, he was really keen to get on board, and he's been a member ever since. So I think, first of all, making sure that they understand what you're trying to achieve, why you want them involved, and make sure that it's clear that you're not just doing a tick box exercise to have them there, that they are going to have a voice and get to really contribute towards the work that you're trying to do. So I think that's really important to emphasize. The other one is, it sort of seems to be a classic struggle everywhere, but it's the time commitment. And it's also, people worry about their day jobs, and ED&I across so many organizations, it's still seen as an add-on or a nice to have, and we don't commit the time to it or allow people to commit the time to it. And often people get involved in these types of activities and they're under pressure from their manager for their day job activities, and they're seen as losing a couple of hours out of the day and things like that. So it's really important that we give commitment to allow people to have the time. They don't have to make these hours up, which I've seen a lot and hear a lot when I talk to people in this space. So I think that's another really good thing to consider, is how do they manage their time, and are they going to be penalized essentially for participating? And then the final one, and this is maybe takes a little bit more time, but it's building up trust, and it's demonstrating that actually we're listening and we're doing something about it. So nothing is more powerful than actually saying, I've heard you raise this issue. This is what we've done to address it, and now we're in a much better place. So actually things like that can really build up the trust. And if you're not hearing directly from the people involved, then how do you know about the issues? How do you know what we need to do to get better? So actually, when you've got something that somebody has flagged and we've put a solution in place to make it better, make sure you shout about it, make sure you celebrate it. And then you can use that to the minority group, people that you're trying to encourage to join, to say, look, this is the difference we're making. But if you don't come and talk to us, if we don't have your voice at the table, then we can never make that change. So celebrating success is really important as well to build up trust and engagement.
Greg, I'm conscious I've probably only got you for another 9 minutes. Is that right? 10 minutes, if I'm
10
lucky.
minutes, yeah.
If I'm lucky. Right, which question, because I'm conscious we're not going to probably get through them all. The questions on the screen, which one do you feel that you'd like to answer? I'll let you pick, because we're not going to get through them all.
I think on the...
And you've answered a lot of them, because you've intertwined it. But yeah, if there's anything on there that you think we should pick out.
Well, I think number 4 is really important. We touched on that at the start around, how do we get more people involved and that type of thing. you know, the preaching to the converted, it's a phrase I hear a lot when we talk about ED&I, and you know, this is another classic example in this session. I'm sure everybody who joins these sessions are joining because they're passionate about ED&I, not because they're a bigot and they want to learn. It's always the opposite way around. So it's really important that we try and encourage more people to understand why ED&I is important in a business, and especially when we touched on it earlier, when we think about the world today with the way the media is, that attacking ED&I initiatives and discrediting ED&I organizations, and then you've got social media and so many keyboard warriors, and it always seems to be certain voices that are the loudest, and someone like Donald Trump is an extreme example, but whatever he says, it gets shouted about and it reverberates, and people suddenly think that's the normal, that's the majority. For me, it's really important that we think about those sort of passive supporters who probably are the majority, who actually are people who do support inclusion, they do support ED&I, but they're more passive in the way they do it, and they don't necessarily shout loudly about it. I always think you've got that group at the one extreme who will be on board. We can rely on them. We don't need to worry about their engagement, their involvement. I wouldn't say take them for granted, but they're in that kind of headspace where they're really, really big supporters of what we're doing. The other end of the spectrum is the people who will never get involved. So I always think, well, just leave them be. Let's not waste our energy on that small group of people who will never get involved. Let's just leave them be. But in the middle, you've got this big chunk of people who either are supportive, but they're not loud and vocal about it, or then they're not sure, they don't understand it, and therefore they just stay on the fringes or don't get involved. So it's really important, firstly, that we educate people. So help them understand why ED&I is important. What are we trying to achieve by doing this? What are the benefits that we will all feel? And it's really important when we talk about the benefits, it's not just for the minority groups, it's for everybody. Everybody benefits from a more inclusive culture, because teams as a whole will perform better. Businesses as a whole will perform better. So everybody wants to work in a successful team, in a successful business, where everybody's high performing and that type of thing. So it's thinking about the benefits, focusing on the benefits for everybody, not just the benefits for the minority group employees. It's also about changing that mindset as well. And again, I mentioned earlier on about sometimes you have to flip things around. So instead of focusing on inclusion, sometimes we can focus on exclusion. And this is another example of something that I've done in the business when I do internal talks and run sessions for teams in our company, is to get the audience to sit quietly for a minute and think about a time when they were excluded, when they felt excluded. And it's incredible how the atmosphere in the room can change, because you've got all of these people reflecting. And two things generally jump out when we ask people to share their reflections. One is that when they were excluded, they share with us a negative experience. So there are times when exclusion might be seen as a positive, or it may work out well for an individual. But typically, if we think of being excluded, we think of a negative experience. And the second thing is when people share their examples of being excluded, often, more often than not, the examples will be from way, way back. So usually it's something that happened at school. And this will be people who are 40, 50, 60, sharing examples of what happened to them when they were 13 years old. That's important because exclusion sticks, and it sticks because it hurts, and it leaves a lasting impression on us. And the obvious example, the classic example, is being picked last for the school team. When you're sort of, the two captains are taking turns and you're that last one. That's an awful feeling, awful position to be in. I cringe to admit this, but I watched The Apprentice, and that happened just recently on an episode, and they're taking turns to pick who's going to go on the team, and then you've got that one person who's last, and you feel almost sorry for them. So thinking about exclusion, and people come up with these stories, but exclusion hurts, and it sticks because it hurts. So when you get people thinking about exclusion, it can often change their mindset, and then they suddenly realize, actually, I wouldn't want to feel like that at work. And then you can turn it around and say, well, that's why we have inclusion. It's to stop people feeling excluded. It's to stop people feeling that they're being bullied or discriminated against, as you felt when you didn't get picked for that football team or whatever it was, the example that you shared. So I think that's also a really important mindset in terms of just changing people's perspectives of what inclusion is, getting them to think about it a little bit differently, because the stereotype when we talk about ED&I, it's all about the usual things like helping women, helping ethnic minority employees. And people don't always engage with that. If you're a straight white man, you think, well, what's in it for me? There's no benefit to me. So it's changing the way we think about it, making sure they understand all of the benefits, and actually that empathetic element as well, the empathy around what it's like to be treated differently. Some people think with their heart, some people think with their head. So I also think it's important to talk about it from not just the personal story element, but the business element. Some people are driven by numbers. They want the spreadsheets, they want to see the bottom line. So think about the business benefits as well. It's that diversity of thought, engaging in different ways with different audiences. And if you're talking to your financial team about ED&I, then actually maybe you shift the focus more away from, not suggesting that people who work in finance are sort of robots without a heart, but but shift it away from the personal stories and maybe focus more on the bottom line. What can we do for our numbers? How can we improve financial performance through more inclusive teams? And then also think about the world beyond your four walls as a business. So think about what can we use to having that hook, that catch to pull somebody in. How can we pull more people into our ED&I activities? We'll think about things outside of the world of work that might interest people. And we've done previously a lot of activity, for example, around sport. So the Rolls Royce rugby team, we got them, we encouraged them, and they were very receptive to taking part in the Rainbow Laces campaign, and then using that to engage with a different audience who might not otherwise have engaged with the work we were doing for LGBTQ plus inclusion. And we also brought in a chap called Zach Sullivan, who's an ice hockey player who came out as bisexual a couple of years ago, and he came in and did a talk. And suddenly we look around the audience for that session, and you've got a professional sports person coming and sharing their story. And actually we attracted a whole different audience to that event, because people wanted to come and learn about the sportsman first and foremost, rather than the ED&I work and the impact of coming out in sport. And suddenly we had a different audience coming in. But once you got them on, in the room or on the Teams call or whatever it is, that's the hook to pull them in, and then they start to learn more and more. And some of them, it's the trigger for them to say, actually, I like this, I want to get more involved. So think about, what other things, and sports just one example. There are many other things, different hobbies and interests, all that kind of thing. And similarly, the social aspect plays a really important role, especially with our inclusion networks, our employee networks. They're very, very keen around the social aspect, but they've got really, really good values as networks around diversity and considering other people's needs. And I've seen inclusion networks in the past where it's all about going to the pub and and alcohol, drinking. But actually that doesn't work, because for religious reasons people may not want to do that. Some people may just feel a bit intimidated going to a pub. People may have health reasons for not wanting to go to drinking alcohol. There's lots of different reasons why people don't drink alcohol or might not want to go to the pub. But within our networks, they've really got diversity at the forefront when it comes to things like social events, so that we can attract different people in, including people who maybe aren't the primary focus. But as an example, we did a walk in the Peak District. It was about September, I think, last year, when the weather was still okay. But we promoted that to all employees, and we actually had a really good turnout of employees who aren't members of our networks, but actually who really enjoy walking in the outdoors and thought this was a great chance to go and do something a bit different. So we're always mixing up what we do, and whether that's internal or external, because the more you mix it up, the more chances are you'll find something that is that hook or that catch for getting somebody else involved. So that's, I think, something that's also really important.
Amazing. Thank you, Greg. You are the font of knowledge. I've not got a word in Edgeway, because honestly, you've been amazing, and thank you so much. I'm really conscious that you've also now got to go and present to the board. And
I've got another couple of minutes. So
you sure?
If anybody's got any questions or comments, yeah, let's have another couple of minutes. It's if people got any questions or comments, then I'd love to hear them. So please do take the opportunity. We've got 2 more minutes.
Anything for Greg before? And I have on the presentation, I have got Greg's LinkedIn QR code. So if anybody's got a smartphone to hand, before we all jump off the call, I have got his LinkedIn QR code that you can scan and you can connect with Greg. Has anyone got any questions for Greg before he leaves? Thank you, Greg and Nicky. Oh, thanks, Jane. Oh, yeah, we've got a hand. And Audrey. Hi, Audrey.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. I'm actually from Canada.
Oh, thanks for joining.
Yeah. I thought everything was really, really interesting. And thank you for sharing. I've been an advisor in DEI for 5 months. In a in the school actually, but like for after high school and before university. Anyways, I don't want to just talk about that. I find my biggest challenge is to and I'm not in a major city, I'm in a small town also. I used to live in Montreal, but I'm 6 hours away up north. So just to give you an idea. And right now I'm facing problems to get to know what DEI is about and what we do. And sometimes you have resources like social workers, or they will feel a threat even. And it's I think it's a thing that just should be seen together, like hands, like hands by hands. I'm sorry, I'm French speaking, so I'm looking a bit for my words.
That's okay.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts on this matter. What is the best way for DEI to get to be known when it's a new job opening in this place? We're about 1,000 people, and there's a lot of welcoming, but also judgments, and how to work together. How could we make the role of DEI understood in a place like this?
So I think for me, the most important place to start is at the very top. So you need to get in front of the most senior leaders within the organization, talk to them about ED&I, make sure they understand what it is, what you're trying to achieve, what the objectives are, and what the benefits are of ED&I in the organization. If you don't have that support from the top, then you're always going to struggle further down. So I would say number one is make sure you start at the top, get the leadership on board, and get their support behind what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, and educate them on what ED&I is and the benefits. Simultaneously, a lot of ED&I also is coming up from the bottom of an organization through everyone. Everyone has a role to play. So identify those passionate people within the business. Look for those passionate people who can support you in your work, doing what you're doing. So find that LGBTQ plus person who's really passionate about LGBTQ plus rights. Find that ethnic minority individual who's passionate about that and wants to step up and make a difference in that space. Finding those passionate volunteers around the business is really important, because then you can start to use them to filter out some of the messaging, some of the comms, to be your advocate and to be your champion. If you're running events or activities, you can then go out through them and try and use them to reach more parts of the organization than what you may be able to reach on your own. But I think also, as part of that, bringing together a community of people almost as a team for you. And what often happens in organizations, the ED&I team, people talk about my ED&I team. I admit, this is the team. And it's the same in many organizations, small and large. The ED&I team is one person or a couple of individuals. We rely a lot on support from volunteers and passionate employees. So look at how you can embed some kind of a community. And if you're 1,000 people, maybe that's too small to want to have multiple networks. Maybe you just create an inclusion network and just call it that, and bring together lots of different groups of people who can then be a bit of a committee for you to throw around ideas to help you deliver some of the work you need to do. The other element I would add to it, though, is for you need to be very clear about what are your priorities and what you're trying to achieve. ED&I is such a broad subject, and it touches every single aspect of an organization. So what I would also say is sit back and look at your organization, where it is now, what are the biggest challenges you have, and what do you want to address, and then prioritize. So for me, when I first joined Rolls Royce SMR, I looked at the demographics in the business, and only 20% of our employees are female. So for us, that's a priority. We want to bolster the number of female employees we have as we work towards having gender balance across the whole business. So for us, gender was one of our top priorities. That helped give us some focus around the activities that we were doing and what we needed to concentrate on first. So what you need to do is just have that look at the business and understand what you're trying to achieve. So prioritize. You have to be a little bit patient with ED&I sometimes. You can't do everything, and it's hard because people who work in ED&I are normally very passionate and want to make a difference. But sometimes we have to take a step back and say, actually, we can't do everything. We're going to focus on this particular topic as a priority, and then we'll bring more and more in as we go. And if you do that and you deliver success, that then also generates that following behind you. As people see you're delivering success, more will happen, more will get involved, and then you can hopefully go on to even greater things.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate that.
Thank
you for asking that, Audrey, too. It's a great question. And did everybody see the QR codes that I popped up? Greg's LinkedIn profiles there. Feel free. That's okay, Greg. You're going to be inundated with followers with loads more questions. So yeah, I've put that up. Greg, I appreciate your time. I know you've got to shoot. I'm going to stay on just to close. But yeah, go and have a sandwich.
I will do. Thank you. It's been great to meet everybody, and appreciate the engagement and the questions. And as Nicky said, do look for me on LinkedIn. You don't need a QR code to find me. I think I'm the only person with my name on there. Slightly unusual surname, so that helps. So it's hard to hide, which can be a blessing or not, depending on the circumstances. But yeah, please do come and find me if you wish to connect. And if you have any other questions beyond this, you can send them to me through Nicky or contact me directly on LinkedIn. Always happy to engage.
Fabulous. Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you for joining.
Thanks very much. Talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.